welcome to BizTech's Health and Wellness Show. Today we feature Timothy Chen, who's the CEO of DocMed Technology. DocMed is the technology investment and development arm of Pharma International Limited, Singapore's leading specialty pharmaceutical and consumer healthcare group, which is listed on the Singapore Stock Exchange. To tell us more, Timothy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
Now, Tim, for a start, give us an overview of DocMed.
DocMed is, like what you mentioned, the digital innovation arm of the Hyphens Group. What we did actually was some restructuring 2 years ago, where we put all the digital assets of the group into DocMed, and our subsidiary, 100% subsidiary, is Pen Million Pharmaceutical. If you may know, Pen Million Pharmaceutical was established in 1947, so we celebrated 75th birthday last year. It is Singapore's oldest wholesaler distributor today in the market. And DocMed, it is on a mission, a B2B mission, where we empower healthcare stakeholders like the pharma principals, like the manufacturers, and the other healthcare stakeholders like the doctors, the healthcare groups, through technology and network effect, so that we can enable them to serve their patients better. So we are very much in the B2B space. We do not go directly into B2C on ourselves. We empower our partners.
Okay, so on your website, you claim to be the largest B2B online pharma marketplace in Singapore. You also claim to have the largest database of healthcare practitioners in ASEAN. Tell us about this and what does your footprint look like?
Right. We are not a young startup, technically to say. We have been running the B2B e-commerce marketplace since year 2000, 2001. So technically, we have been running the e-commerce business for healthcare industry for the past 22 years. So as you can imagine, in Singapore itself, we cover close to 85% of the private sector healthcare practitioners, the vets, the dentists, procuring from our platform. So that is our origin, how we started our digital asset, how we started on the e-commerce side. But if you look at the entire group itself, we serve close to, say, 18,000, 20,000 healthcare practitioners across ASEAN, where the corporate HQ, we have offices in Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Philippines. So you can see that we have been serving the healthcare industry, especially the doctors, throughout these countries for many, many years. So that is the basis of our network of practitioners across the entire ASEAN.
Now, Tim, the B2B supply chain in the healthcare sector is very interesting. You've got a lot of stakeholders. You've got the pharma companies, you've got the healthcare providers, you've got the hospitals, clinics, labs, patients. Walk us through some of the major issues that are facing the ecosystem right now.
It's interesting, Brian. I think this question, you would know it as much as I do, right? Considering your background. It's a very, very complex entire supply chain. From the top end of the supply chain, you have your manufacturers, you have your pharmaceutical principals. Besides pharmaceutical principals, you have your medical consumables, you have your medical devices. But today, I don't think we are going to talk so much about it. But trust me, it's in the same sphere, right? And down the road, you have your distributors, your official distributors, the big boys. The next layer, you have your wholesalers, where they wholesale smaller quantities to their end customers. And in between, from the wholesalers to the patients, there are in Malaysia especially, there are your runners, they're your traders, they're your pharmacies. And of course, they serve the doctors' network, the GPs, the specialists. So you see, when a patient comes in, be it they see the GP or they see a pharmacy, no matter where the pharmacy is, part of a big chain, it's part of an independent, it's an independent unit, you can see the levels of complexity of where they get the drug from. So the issue comes like this. If I go to a small independent pharmacy, now this independent pharmacy may not have the requisite MOQ to buy from the big distributors. So where do they source it from? They probably have to source it from other bigger pharmacy chains, when they do wholesale trade, they source it from the wholesaler. During the COVID, there was severe disruption. So sometimes you even can find products in the black market. So you see, there's one issue right there. The transparency of the market, it is not there. It's very, I would say, murky. We call it a murky distribution network. It is
And
very,
the murkiness also is because you have an ASEAN footprint, the murkiness varies as well. So you have some markets which are very transparent. You have the markets like Singapore, and then you have less transparent markets where, for example, parallel imports come in from markets like India, for example, which are a tenth of the cost.
well, like I said, Brian, you know the market very well, isn't it? This is exactly the good point. You have Singapore, very transparent, very small market, $1 billion US, $1 billion market size. Everything is very transparent. And you have the other end of the spectrum, be it China, be it even Vietnam, where there are so many layers of, we call it traders, in between transactions before it reaches the end patient. So that's where the murkiness lies.
And the other thing also, Tim, which is very, very important in some markets, again, more than others, the counterfeit trade, especially with pharmaceuticals, that's where patients and even other healthcare providers are sometimes duped into buying not just non-ethical drugs, but basically counterfeit drugs.
I am so glad you brought this up because it is so close to my heart. Do you remember the reports last year where there were fake cough mixtures in emerging countries? I think you had it in Indonesia, you had it in, I believe in India, where young children were dying because they consume some of these cough mixtures. It is very sad. It is terrible to have, but you're right, because when how would I say this? When the patient receives the drugs, or when the doctor prescribes the drug, or from the pharmacy prescribes the drug, you actually don't know how they source for that drug. Think about it. There are so many suppliers in the market. There's so many parallel imports. In Malaysia, I believe there's close to easily 500 suppliers of pharmaceutical products. How would you know which is authentic? How would you know how do they get that source? Was the supply chain broken when the drug is finally delivered to the patient? What happened in between? There's no transparency at all. That's why today's topic of supply chain, digitalization of supply chain, is so important, because drugs, you never know, it could be in the hot sun before it reaches your destination. Has it been damaged? Is it real? Is it
Absolutely,
authentic?
because the efficacy and also is impacted, especially things like, and we just came out of COVID, vaccines that needed to be refrigerated at a certain or kept at a certain temperature. And in some countries, unfortunately, yes, they administered the vaccines, but then they were not transported correctly. So these are all some of the real ground level issues that I think are facing the overall ecosystem in terms of supply chain across the region.
You're absolutely right. You've
So
got it
then,
spot on.
so how do you then, as a DocMed, solve these issues?
So that's where we come in. We started an e-commerce marketplace for some time. So think about it as an Amazon for healthcare. And we authenticate some of these supplies. So think of it as Amazon, think of it as Lazada, where you have your official stores, say of Pfizer, of GSK, some of the big MNCs, or you have stores direct from the manufacturers. They're authenticated by us, they're validated by us, they're listed on the store, and they are open for our practitioners, healthcare practitioners, buyers to procure directly from, and they know where the source is from. And they can, in a way, because it's so transparent, they can also do price comparisons. This is one of the reasons why you have a marketplace platform. It is authentic, it is transparent, it's efficient, where you don't have to go time and interview your various sources. It's all in one platform. Exactly how you will do your shopping on Lazada and Shopee, isn't it?
So how do you then, because you are in various markets and you are launching in Vietnam and in Malaysia as well, how do you ensure the level of supply and consistency across your supply chain, including especially the last mile connectivity to the healthcare providers?
Maybe I'll share first on in Singapore, how do we do it? In Singapore, we have a central warehouse where it forms as a fulfillment warehousing distribution center. So any time from our warehouse, logistics, the entire chain is digitalized right to the front of the e-commerce platform. So when the order comes in, you can see the entire tracking of the purchase, of the packing, of the transportation, all the way to the doctors. And of course, in Singapore, we have well away also. We have the e-pharmacy, where we direct from the warehouse, our pharmacist packs the medication and we deliver direct to the patient within 3 hours. So it's literally from warehouse straight to the doctors or the pharmacies, or warehouse direct to the patient, and we track every step of the way.
But that's a B2C business then.
Yeah, that's where I have to clarify. We deliver direct to the patient, but we do not do, the drug is ordered still by the doctor. So when the doctor comes into, say, our DocMed ecosystem of assets, they can either order drugs for their clinic, dispensary in their clinics, or they can order drugs on demand for their patients if they do not have the drugs in their clinics. So at the end of the day, it is still a B2B business, but we add the additional mile of the last mile delivery to the patients, ensuring cold chain integrity all the way to the patient.
Okay, and that's interesting because, so if you look at the landscape of healthcare across the region, some markets are dispensing markets and some markets are prescription markets. So how do you address the issue where, for example, in places like Malaysia versus Australia, so Australia prescription market, the pharmacy basically issues the medicine. In a place like Malaysia, basically the doctor dispenses medicine themselves. How do you reconcile that as you enter different markets?
That's a really, really good question. You know, in Singapore and Malaysia, our healthcare systems are similar. So it is a doctor dispensing system. And so that's why we work directly with doctors. But when we move to countries in future, let's say, for example, not just Australia, any other part of Asia, we all follow the Australian landscape where the pharmacist will do the prescription. Right? How do we do that? We have to morph our business model. We have to adapt our business model. How can pharmacists use our platform rather than a doctor to prescribe medication direct to the patients and deliver direct to their home? It seems like an easy business model where it delivers just to the doorstep, but think about it, of the compliance, the cybersecurity, the patient details, the integrity of the cold chain, never compromise. And that's why we are the only one licensed by the Ministry of Health in Singapore under the HSA, Singapore Health and Science Authority. It's a huge compliance requirement, and we are the only one that's licensed to do it.
Now, Tim, you know, you're part of a very old company, almost 75 years old. You're innovating in the ASEAN landscape. It's a very complex, as we've just discussed, a very, very complex healthcare landscape. What are your plans in terms of where are you at today in terms of countries that you're in and rolled out your e-pharmacy? And what are your plans like in 2023, 2024?
Let me start with Singapore first. So we have our e-commerce platform that today we serve close to 85% of the clinics and pharmacies in Singapore. We have e-pharmacy. Currently, we do an average of 200, 250 e-prescriptions a day, which is the size of a small community hospital in Singapore. We have our own centralized warehouse, procurement, distribution. So in Singapore, the industry size, let's say, is US 1 billion. We have more or less covered, right? Do we replicate this business model in places like Malaysia and Vietnam? In some way, yes, and in some way, no. So in Vietnam, we partner with one of the biggest distributor in Vietnam, a local distributor called Hoang Duc. And Hoang Duc has distribution centers throughout Vietnam. As you know, there's North and South Vietnam is a very big country serving 100 million people. And we will we have form of joint venture where we will leverage on their distribution hubs, and using our technology of, be it the e-commerce or in the future e-pharmacy, we can quickly reach out to the various pharmacies. In Vietnam, there's close to 40,000 pharmacies, independent pharmacies across the entire country. So we can quickly reach out to them, launch the vendors, connect with the pharmacies, and start the entire digitalization process of the industry. In Malaysia, that's where things get very interesting. In Malaysia, we are 100% owned. We are self-owned ourselves. We are very open to working with partners. In fact, we are in talks with selective strategic partners where we can immediately come in, leverage on our know-how and what we have done right in Singapore, adapt our business model to the local culture, local regulations. Trust me, it's not so straightforward as just porting our entire business model over.
Healthcare is a complex business.
It is a very complex business. So there's also a lot of independent pharmacies. If you walk along, in KL or in PJ, you see a whole row of independent pharmacies. It's booming. So how can we cater our business model to various parts of Malaysia, ensuring the same kind of integrity, cold chain integrity, supply chain efficiency, transparency, so on and so forth? We have to adapt. And what faster way it is that we are open to looking for strategic partners.
And what specific sort of strategic partners are you looking for in markets like Malaysia?
We can work very strategically with a distributor or even a wholesaler, where we can quickly leverage on the existing infrastructure and expand using digital. Plus, you mentioned earlier on, we have a 75-year-old company as a backbone, and how we modernize it and bring it up to today's era, digital era. We can do the same for Malaysia. So it's our hope when we go into a new country, we'll hope to partner with a strategic partner in this business who has the existing infrastructure. Can we do it on our own? Yes, we can. Definitely we can. We can build another 10 million in Malaysia. But is that something that we want to do, that we take time to build our warehousing, make our distribution network bigger, more efficient? I think that will take significant time and investment. We rather always work for partnerships these days.
Tim, it's been a fascinating conversation, and I wish you the best of luck in a very, very complex business. But before we leave, Tim, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
In regards to business, I think that I wouldn't say any further on the very complex B2B business. But what I want to leave my final thoughts is, with the recent pandemic that's happened, there's something that has emerged and is very relevant to us, is that we have close to 20 over years of transaction data. And before this recent wave of generative AI, we have already leveraged on AI to forecast demands and seasonal demands, diseases, trends pre-COVID. And during COVID, this has also served us really, really well, where we could forecast perhaps the next wave of COVID that hit us. In fact, last year in March, we noticed that there was an additional uptake of antibiotics, flu drugs, when it wasn't even a seasonal flu season. And we knew that there was something sinister coming back again. And truth be told, there was an outbreak of flu. So we had this data. So I think moving forward, how can we leverage on the latest cutting edge or predictive or generative AI that we can help the future for the governments or even healthcare groups to better predict disease trends? I think this is something that we are going to focus a lot on over the next few years.
Tim, thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you for having me.
We've been speaking to Timothy Chen. He's the CEO of DocMed Technology out of Singapore. I'm Brian Fernandez, and you've been watching and listening to BizTech's Health and Wellness Show. This show will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.